This is you, an entrepreneur, and you have a world-changing idea. But you soon realize building a business is much more than just having the next big idea. Studies show 9 out of 10 innovations fail in the marketplace. But why is that? In the first years of your business, you have to implement strong systems, get a sales team, become a marketing ninja, finance and accounting wizard, a tech guru, learn to punch through walls and assemble the Avengers. It's just too much to juggle on your own. Unless you have an eye patch and your name is Nick Fury. Since it's not, how do you build a business that succeeds, not become one of the many that will fail? When you partner with RevRoad, you get access to teams of experts to handle the back end of your business so that you can focus on the front end, which is your secret sauce. How does it work? It's simple. Need to hire a rock star sales team? RevRoad helps you reach that goal. Need to get a high-quality product out to your customers? Our designers and engineers get your product finished and ready to go to market. What about capital? Yep, we can help you find that too. You won't have to keep track of multiple agencies. RevRoad can do it all in-house, saving you time and money. Plus, you get your own mentor. That's like having access to Tony Stark when you're in a bind. Not to mention, we provide sweet open office space, giving you a chance to work with other successful entrepreneurs. Other accelerators offer a small amount of cash for most of your equity. Instead, we offer long-term access to all of our resources and expertise for a small equity exchange. To start the evaluation process, apply on our website. You may be surprised how RevRoad ready your company is. Let's win together.
Missing someone.
Some people say, can you really have it all? I think Carly's had it all. And I love how Carmel says it. You can have it all, you just can't have it all at once. You got to work on it a little bit at a time. So with that, let's all welcome Carly to the stage.
Well, thank you so much for that very generous introduction, and you sort of, I don't know, breezed past the tough stuff, right? No life is perfect. Mine hasn't been either. And no life is without its challenges and sometimes its tragedies, and my life has had those as well. But I am blessed to be here with you and in this country, and I want to talk a little bit about why I'm here and why actually it's so important that you're here. But before I do that, I want to ask you all a question. How many of you are here at your first political event? You know, you haven't been to a fundraiser before. Okay, not that many. You haven't been to a fundraiser before. How many of you consider yourselves diehard partisans of one sort or another? Okay. How many of you consider yourselves non-political? Okay. So kind of a diverse group, yes. The reason I ask those questions is because I think it is really easy these days for a lot of people to disengage. And why is it easy to disengage? Because honestly, politics feels a lot like worldwide wrestling, right? I mean, we call each other names, we hurl insults, we are rude and crude. We tend to think, all the polling data says this now, we tend to think as Americans that if somebody doesn't agree with us, that they don't share our concern and our care for the nation. That's not a good place for us to be as citizens. And yet that's what the polling data says. It says that we're getting more and more polarized. We're getting angrier. We're dividing. We're not uniting. And we are having difficulty talking to people who don't agree with us. That's certainly not what the founders intended. I wasn't a political person. I certainly wasn't young college Republicans. I admire people who knew early on that they wanted to be politically active. I was not one of those people. In fact, I wasn't politically active at all for much of my life. I didn't vote for much of my life. And then one day, I kind of started to figure out that whether I cared about politics or not, that politics and politicians and the policies they pursue locally or in a state or in a nation impact every single one of us, for better or for worse. And so whether I liked it or not, politics was my problem too. And so I started to pay attention. That caused me to think a lot about, what do I believe? What have I learned in my life? And I've learned a couple really basic things that I think are at the foundation of why this country is unique and great, and why, in a community like Provo, a bunch of folks can get together and say, we're going to turn this into an entrepreneurial hotspot and do it. The first thing I learned was that everybody has more potential than they realize. Everybody. And that started with me. I was a secretary. I was a medieval history major. I was a law school dropout. I was a young woman in a time when it wasn't easy for young women, particularly those who had dropped out of law school after 2 months and had a medieval history major but knew how to type well. It was a hard time to get a job. And so as I sat and typed and filed and answered the phones in that little 9-person company, I wasn't focused on my future or my potential. I was just trying to pay the rent. But I remember 2 men in that company came up to me and said, you know, we've been watching you, and we think you could do more. Do you want to learn what we do? And that was my introduction to business. But more than that, it was my introduction to the idea that people are not defined by their circumstances unless we let that happen. I could tell you so many stories that prove this better than my own, but I'll just tell you 2. Because I think recognizing that every person has potential, enormous potential, is critical to how this nation functions and why we are so unique. I could tell you the story of a guy named Jim who, you know, he was a middle-aged engineer, kind of rumpled, not particularly noteworthy in any way. Came and did his job every day. Didn't ask a lot of questions, didn't suck up to the big brass, just did his job. And he worked for me, and one day I went over to Jim and we started talking about what he did, and I said, Jim, do you think there's any problems? Do you see any problems in what you're doing? He said, well, yeah, I do. I won't bore you, but with the specific problem, but fundamentally what he saw was that we were getting billed for something that wasn't the same as what he was asking for. And so I said, well, maybe we ought to focus on solving that problem. Jim, unremarkable Jim, saved us $300 million in a single year. I could tell you the story of a woman I met in the slums of New Delhi on top of a roof. And as I climbed a ladder to get to that roof, this is when I chaired Opportunity International, a microfinance organization, lending very small amounts of money to very poor people, because most people aren't poor because they lack potential. They're poor because they lack opportunity, or they lack somebody to take a chance on them, or they lack somebody to see the potential in them. And every single one of us needs somebody to take a chance on us. So we took a chance on these clients by extending a helping hand and training them to become entrepreneurs. But they were in New Delhi, and their circumstances were desperate. And I expected to see desperation in these 10, they were all women, women's eyes. It's not what I saw. I saw pride and focus and determination and hope, because they were actually solving the problem in front of them, which was that their families were living in desperate poverty. And one woman in particular said she had been desperately afraid to take a loan. Her husband was against it, her in-laws were against it, her parents were against it. In her culture, women didn't do this. And finally she did it. She took the loan. And I said, well, how does your family feel now? Oh, they're happy they all work for me. Everyone has more potential than they realize, and sometimes we realize. And the genius of this country is that our founders said, when they said everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a radical idea at the time, a visionary and unique idea still, what they were really saying was people should not be defined by their circumstances. People, regardless of their circumstances, every person has value and potential, and we ought to treat them with dignity and give them the opportunity to fulfill their potential. That's a core belief, and I think a core founding principle of this nation. What's another thing I learned along the way? That people closest to the problem know best how to solve it. Jim knew how to solve the problem because he understood it. The woman on top of the roof knew how to solve it. She knew what would sell. She knew her community. The mayor of Provo knew how to solve some problems, and he knew who to go to in this room to help him solve the problems. People closest to the problem know best how to solve it. And so if you read the Constitution, what you'll find is that while it is a declaration of rights without a doubt, it is also a document designed to ensure that the maximum number of problems get solved locally. Now, we've strayed a little far from that, to be honest. Both parties have. But truthfully, the Constitution is all about what the federal government shouldn't do, and all about what localities and communities and citizens should do. In this day and age, in this era of politics, while we're being rude and crude and back and forth and saying that if you don't agree with me, you don't care like I do, and both sides that do it and both sides have done it for a long time, we tend to ask about loyalty to party. Which party are you loyal to? I think it's the wrong question. It's totally the wrong question. The right question is, who stands up for the principles upon which this nation was founded? Who stands up for the principle that every person has value and that each of us are capable of building lives of dignity and purpose and meaning? Who stands up for the principle that people closest to the problem know best how to solve it, so let's give them a chance to solve it? Who stands up for the principle that if you concentrate too much power in too few hands for too long, and we've been doing that in Washington for a while, folks, that power will be abused and the money will be wasted. George Washington, a long time ago, made a prediction. You may not know this, but our founding fathers were not enthusiastic about the establishment of political parties. They feared they would become power centers in their own right. And so George Washington said the problem with political parties is they will come to care only about winning. And they will no longer care about values and problem solving and governing. About 40 years later, Alex de Tocqueville traveled throughout the United States, and he was amazed by what he saw. And what he saw mostly was what he called civil society and the power of civil society. And he observed that the strength of a democracy is measured in the quality of functions provided by private citizens. The strength of a democracy is measured in the quality of functions provided by private citizens. I will be honest with you and say that I've been asked to do a lot of things this year. I've been asked to support a lot of people, and I haven't shown up at all that many things. I show up today because your former mayor, your current congressman, is a person, a man, who represents the values that I think are important to this nation and to this community. And yes, to the party that he represents. He believes that every person has value and that everyone has potential. And he has seen it and helped promote it and enable it in his community over and over again. He clearly knows that people closest to the problem know best how to solve it. And he also knows that it's not about loyalty to party. It's about doing the right thing to solve the problem with courage. Get him to tell you the story, if he hasn't, about the courage it took to vote no on the omnibus spending bill, something everybody in the party wanted him to do. Talk to him about the character it takes to work with people when the going gets tough, and the going always gets tough, to be consistent and principled in the face of setbacks. Talk to him about how effective collaboration actually requires humility. The humility to understand none of us can do it all by ourselves. All of us need help. Everything worthwhile is done by a team. And how collaboration with others also requires empathy. Instead of condemning someone for disagreeing with us, we try and reach out and understand, why are you there? Collaboration doesn't mean sacrificing your principles. It does mean being clear about your principles, hanging on to your principles, but then working with humility and empathy with others so that you can actually solve the problem. And when you add all that up, that equals leadership. John is a leader. He's a problem solver. That's what leaders focus their attention on. Solving problems, making things better, challenging the way things are. That's what John is. And that's why I'm here, because he deserves our support. Let me tell you why it's important that you're here. Maybe it feels like, well, he doesn't, I mean, he's got a lot of support and he's going to win, and how much can my, dollars matter? Well, first of all, your dollars do matter. But more than that, I can tell you as a candidate myself, and I certainly know from afar how difficult and lonely what John is doing right now can be. John needs your support. He needs you to say, we're with you. He needs you to pay attention to the things that he cares about. He needs you to continue to hold him accountable, to represent the things that you care about. In other words, it's not just about voting for him, although that's hugely important. It's not just about writing him a check, although that's hugely important. It is about standing as a citizen with your elected representative and letting him know you have his back because you know he has yours. One last thing about this nation, and I think we forget this a lot. In this nation, we were founded on the idea that the citizen is sovereign. The citizen is sovereign. Not a party, not a president, not a government, a citizen. And so the most important thing we as citizens can do is support the leaders among us, lift up the leaders among us, and help solve the problems in front of us. That's what you do, that's what he does, and that's why I'm here. Thank you so very much for having me.
I know, right? I know there'll be another presidential campaign. I hope you'll be available. I'm so grateful to you for speaking and sharing your thoughts with us and sharing your heart with us, Carly. That was very powerful. A great example of why we are here for John. All of us know that John has been a wonderful member of the community. Many of us have gotten to know him when he was a mayor. That's when I got to know him. I will never forget the day. Curtis probably remembers this. When we were in our office at Imagine Learning, and we received a surprise visit from our mayor, and we were honored and didn't know why he was there, a little worried. Why was the mayor here? And when we asked him why he was there, he said, I'm just here because I love that you're growing a business and I want to do everything possible to help you succeed. And from that point on, he came over periodically and proactively just asked, what can I do to make your life better? And that was a huge, huge indicator of his heart and his action to help our local community grow. That company today, when we started, we had 16 employees, right, Curtis? And today, what, 500? 500 employees? Yeah. And making an impact all over the United States and in many countries around the world. And so I'm so grateful for the role that you've played in helping create that atmosphere for our companies, for other ones that we're working with today. And for those of you who don't know, John also was a big part of the Freedom Festival, America's Freedom Festival. It's the largest celebration of our country's freedom west of the Mississippi. And it's a wonderful event. He's been a key instrument in that success. Beyond that, he's an incredible husband and father. It's been fun to talk with lots of you and many others who couldn't make it today, who talked about their experience with him in that way. He also was being mayor, running for Congress, and then for those of you who are LDS, you'll recognize this, was asked to accept a calling to be the Young Men's President, which is a huge amount of time and dedication. And one of the gentlemen who walked in here just a minute ago, because he couldn't stay the whole time, said, Darren, you have no idea what a difference he made for my son during that time. And he couldn't stay. He came just to say that and share that. And and that was replicated over and over again. And now, as Congressman, he's done a number of things to help, as Carly has pointed out, to really help our country in many ways that have shown a lot of courage. Now, as an introduction, those of you who know him know that he has something unique and special about him. And it's a shared fetish. I was visiting with him. Yeah, it is a fetish. I was visiting with him once in his office and as mayor, and he was running for Congress, and I had my leg up, and he was like, "Oh, those are cool socks. Do you like socks?" And I said, "Yeah, I love cool socks." And he goes, "I've got socks for you." And he had a pair of John Curtis for Congress socks for me. They're the coolest socks. And we've always loved socks, my family. Noah here, who's the CEO of Allegra Learning, also has a sock thing. Noah reaches into his sock. He never matches his socks. Okay, he throws them all in a drawer. And then he reaches in, and he pulls one out, and then he looks away, and he pulls out another one. And if it matches, he throws it back and gets another one. So socks are a big fun thing. So each of you today are going to receive a pair of John Curtis socks and RevRoad socks. And there's a very small story I have to tell you about this. In our work at Imagine Learning, we did a lot of work in Asia. And there's a common practice that when you go and you meet with someone there, they give you a gift. And you give them a gift. And the gift is pretty nice usually the first time you meet. And then the second time you meet, they give you another gift and you give them a gift. And it's not quite as nice. And then the next time, you get another one and they give you one, and then it's not quite as nice as that previous one. And you know you're real friends when they give you a pair of socks. That means we're friends, gift giving is over. So, as you all leave, you know that you're a friend of John Curtis because you're receiving socks. Okay, with that, we'd like to welcome John Curtis to the stage.
Well, thank you. I'm going to grab some notes I had here. I'm not sure if I'll use them, but I want them accessible because there's some important things I want to share with you. Before we do anything, I just need to stop and say thank you, Carly. I have heard dozens and hundreds of political speeches and politicians in the last year and a half, and never have I heard feelings articulated as well as you just did. Thank you for being here. Among other things, all of us are fans of Carly, and all of us would like to see her run again for president. But let me just suggest what we need in addition is lots of Carlys running, and there are some in this room, women that we need in politics and who should be running for office. And let me just tell you a quick story about my wife and her family. My mother, by the way, Sue's been the president of the Provo School District. My mother was the president of the Granite School District, the first woman president of the Granite School District. My great-grandmother was the first woman president of the Salt Lake School District. So there's quite a history, but Sue's family has a very unique history in politics. Many of you know this, her great-grandmother some of you know it better than I do, was Martha Hughes Cannon. Now, if you don't know the story of Martha Hughes Cannon, let me very quickly tell you. She was the first woman elected to a state Senate seat in the entire United States. Now, that's remarkable, but not near as remarkable as the fact that to win that seat, she defeated her husband. I knew you'd like that back right there. And so thank you, and thank you for that example. Would like to also thank my wife for it. It's unusual that she can actually be here with me today, and we tend to cross paths a lot. Thank you for being here. I need to thank Darren. Darren, this event today, where'd you go? Darren, thank you. I don't know anybody in the world that could have pulled this off in the manner that you have. As a candidate and as a politician, you get really used to people saying, oh, I'd like to help, and then you turn around and they're gone. And so sometimes we take that a little for granted when somebody says would like to help. Darren said he'd like to help, and look at the result of today. So thank you so much for today. That means a lot to me. And let me just mention Adriel. Adriel, where are you? She's in the very back. So Adriel, we struggled and struggled with a campaign manager for phase 2 of the campaign, and Adriel came into our life. And let me just simply say this. The first time I went to the Republican convention, I secured, it's embarrassing, 9% of the delegates' votes. 9%. But for the signature route, as you well know, I wouldn't have made it on the ballot. Under Adriel's leadership, we secured how much? 59%. Just 12 months later, very much the same group of people, and we moved from a victory of about 11% in the primary to a victory of about 75-25 in the Republican primary, and it's due to her leadership and her help. So thank you, Adriel, for all you do. Well, let me just, gosh, our time is short, and if I can get through some things I want to share with you, would love to do a few Q&As if we have time. I want to share basically 3 things with you. What's happening in the district that concerns me, engages me, excites me, and why we're here today, and then a little bit of a message of hope, if I can try to articulate those 3 things. Sue and I, let me start with what's happening in the district. Sue and I, 2 weeks ago, had an opportunity to visit the Hopi Indian Reservation, followed up by visiting the Navajo Reservation. Several weeks ago, I went out to the Ute Indian Reservation. I've now been to the Navajo Reservation 3 times in 8 months. And it's because most of us do not have any idea the conditions that people who live in Utah, in our congressional district, live under. We have situations with no running water, no power. Obviously, that involves all sorts of sanitary conditions. We have roads that every time it rains, it washes the roads out, and every time that happens, the kids don't make it to school. A real sincere need in our district that most of us are not aware of and that we need to engage in. And that's something that I've taken on that's real important to me. Another issue that is very important to this district is the rural part of the district. I have 5 rural counties. In here in Utah County and Salt Lake County, we're experiencing an economy that is on fire. It's amazing. Most of you with businesses are struggling hiring employees, right, and finding a good talent. If you drive just 60 miles away, we get into the rural part of Utah. We're experiencing double-digit unemployment and high opioid use. And it's high. It's too high here in this area, but much higher there. And so that's a real concern to me and something that I'm working on in the district that's very, very important. We have some very gnarly, I'll use the word gnarly, public lands issues. Many of you have heard of Bears Ears. You might not know the specifics of Bears Ears, but Bears Ears is 1.3 million acres of beautiful land, and the Indian antiquities there are unique and special. And it's interesting to one of your points, Carly. Everybody agrees on what should happen in the end, but nobody can agree on how we get there. And it's causing a lot of divisiveness and a lot of problems. And right next door, Emory County, we have a public lands bill that's been entered in, and Senator Hatch is taking it on the Senate side. I'm really excited about this bill. It is an example of how to do public lands right. We've got great consensus between environmental groups, ranchers, other recreational users of the land. It's over 1 million acres of conservation. If it's successful, it will be more conservation than the United States Congress has done in 8 years combined, and perhaps the largest conservation bill in Utah. And exactly to your point, it's driven by the locals who are closest to the problem and know the right answers. And I'm really excited about that. That one issue is taking up as much as half of my staff's time back in Washington, D.C. Well, not everything is challenging. We have an economy that is just crazy robust here in Utah County and Salt Lake County, and that's a lot of fun to be part of. That's going on in the district. Those are probably the main issues. The other one I would just mention to you quickly is I just met with Mark Harrison, the CEO of Intermountain Healthcare, and we've got to figure out healthcare. That's another really gnarly issue, and one that has become very partisan, and we've got these crazy polarizing positions, and in the meantime, people are struggling and suffering. And I just wanted to give you the sense of when I wake up in the morning, what I think about, what I'm working on, and what we're trying to solve. We're really excited. I've been in Congress 8 months now. Ironically, we didn't think about this today. To the very day is the 1-year anniversary of winning the Republican nomination last year. So, happens to be today. We've had 2 bills that have successfully made it through the House. The first one passed with a 392-6 margin. You want bipartisan work? How about that? Really excited about that. We have another one that's an opioid bill in the House. It recently passed over 70 bills related to opioids. We wrapped them all into one, and one of those was my bills. You know that we have a serious problem with opioids, but where it's really bad is with pregnant women. Across the United States, 1 out of 5 women in pregnancy are prescribed opioids. This is what's really unfortunate. In Utah, we double that average. And so my bill was just a simple bill to do a study to find out why, and we got that through the House. We have a rural broadband permitting bill that we think will make it through both the House and the Senate this year. And we have this public lands bill in Emory County that I talked about. By the way, my co-sponsor of my public lands bill is the ranking Democrat member of the Committee of Jurisdiction. Now let me interpret that. What that means is it's the senior Democrat on the committee that the bill must go through, called us and asked to co-sponsor the bill, which is really exciting and also points out the bipartisan nature of that public lands bill. Well, let me just transition just quickly to why you're here today. And I know some of you have asked that question. I hear all the time, John, you're going to win by a large margin. Why do you need to be out there fundraising? Why are you doing all of this? And I'd like to try to articulate that to you the best that I can. I, like many of you, love my independence. Always have. I have a difficult time asking for help. How many of you can relate to that? When the Curtis family moves, and we have moved a lot, we don't call the elders quorum, we don't call the neighbors. I make my wife lift couches with me, and it's just this fierce independent streak that I have in me. And I find myself right now in the middle of something that for the first time I cannot do myself. I have to have help. And that's humbling, and that's hard on me. But there's really no way to do this without help and without support. And that support comes in many, many ways. So you know, to give you a sense of the financial aspect of it, we've spent, and this sounds crazy, and I'm almost embarrassed about it, over $150,000 in the last year simply to collect signatures, to ensure, because many of you are familiar with our delegate system, to ensure that I get on the ballot. It'll give you a sense of the challenge. I've been in campaign mode for 18 months. I've had to keep a staff full-time on that campaign. Adriel will tell you I am the tightest and cheapest person on the planet. Would you disagree with that? But still, yeah. Yeah, we spend it very carefully. But I've had to keep a campaign staff going and moving along through this whole process, and will through the end of November. And then guess what? In November, I am only just a year away from filing again to run for re-election. And I didn't come here to operate from a position of weakness. I came here to get things done and to be strong and bold, and I have to have money in the bank to do that and to operate. I can't go in this last election cycle because we just came off the previous election just a few months before. We came into that without the money to gather signatures, without the money to do the advertising that we need to. So we're trying to build up that type of stability in the campaign that will allow us to go from year to year as we move into that. Some of you will find this hard and difficult, but I have a responsibility and am expected to help other candidates. I know some of you represent different parties here, but those of us, the Republicans, are trying very, very hard to hang on to the House this fall. Those of you who have enjoyed the deregulation and the tax reform will know how important it is to hang on to the House this year for us. And so I'm expected to help other candidates. And this is the irony. They look at my district and say, well, you're so Republican, you don't need any help. But we need you to help all of us who are struggling. And there are those expectations. I'm working hard. There's a committee. I'm currently on they call it Natural Resource Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, and the Small Business Committee. I'm on those 3 committees. And they are awesome committees, and I love them. But there's a committee called Energy and Commerce that 2/3 of the legislation that goes to the House passes through this committee, the jurisdiction of this committee. And that's really what my goal is, to find myself on there. They manage healthcare. All the healthcare issues run through that committee. Those of you who are concerned about net neutrality, that goes through there. All the high-tech issues that happen in this district all go through that committee. And that's part of the fundraising as well, to be contributing and helping to those who need help across the country. That, I hate to admit it, but that's part of getting those committee assignments and just part of my reality. So thank you for your donations. Thank you for your support, your friendship. Donations are nice, but I just got to tell you, as somebody who plays in this world that is rough and tumble, your friendship is also extremely important, clearly more important to me and my family. And we thank you for that and for being part of that. Let me now leave just a little message of hope with you. And for those of you who have heard me articulate this, Steve and others, you're going to hear it twice. But I think it's an important message. I'm often asked, what was the biggest surprise when you went to Congress? And I wish we had 6 hours to talk about my experience. Can you imagine moving from a mayor of a town of 118,000 going back to Congress? And first of all, let me say what an amazing honor it is. I look across at the Capitol frequently, and I say to myself, I get to go to work there. I walk past people who wait in line just to get in the building, and I can just walk in there and go to work there. Can you imagine what an honor it is to be back there? But I'm asked what surprised me the most, and this is my answer, and it's an easy answer. It's that there are a lot of good people in Washington. We hear, and we're even guilty of saying the swamp, and it's terrible, and everybody's bad, and it's just all needs to be purged. And I'll be the first to tell you there are those elements there, and it is swampy. But I'm also here to tell you that I rarely talk with a colleague that I don't walk away and say, that's an amazing person, and they're here for the exact same reason that I am. They came with the same good intentions. We see things differently, but they're a good person. And that I hope gives you hope. People ask me, well, if you have all these great people back there, why are you so dysfunctional? And I say to them, and you'll get this the moment you hear it, have you ever been part of an HOA? You get it, right? HOAs, you love your neighbors, but you can't govern yourselves, right? One of the greatest challenges in the world is to govern ourselves. And we come together in HOAs and do really stupid things, and most people who are in HOAs have had difficulties. Congress is one very, very, very large HOA. It's full of good people, but we struggle to govern ourselves. I have seen moments that are amazing. I mentioned this opioids bills that we just passed. Those were all bipartisan bills. Those were passed with both Republicans and Democrats coming together and saying, we have a problem, let's do something. One of the things that I get to do, and I smile when I say it's a privilege, because it is a privilege, but it's kind of the new guy's KP duty. It's to preside on the floor late at night. You have to have a presiding officer, and so they'll give you an assignment to preside on the floor. And one of the times that I was presiding, I heard debate on these opioid bills. And we rarely really have serious debate in Congress on the floor, but this debate consisted of a Republican standing up and introducing a bill and thanking the Democrat members who were helpful in putting the bill together. and then the Democrats standing up on the other side and thanking the Republican members for their work on the bill. And it was just really an amazing experience. And that's Congress at its best, right? And we did some serious things on opioids. There is far more of that than the other. We just talk about the other, the bad stuff that goes on back there. I learned this. A bill, you want a bill to go through on what's called suspension. Suspension means that you suspend all the rules, and it moves, it fast tracks a bill. So if you want your bill to get voted on quickly, you'll put it on suspension. The catch is it has to pass with a 2/3 majority vote. So it has to be a bipartisan bill. 80% of the bills that come before the House go through on suspension and pass with that 2/3 majority vote. That's 80%. And we have to do a much better job of talking about that. Finally, as part of this message of hope, let me share with you a couple of experiences that I had that were really impactful for me. After I'd been there several weeks, I got an invitation to go to dinner with Paul Ryan. And that's something you don't turn down. I have tremendous respect for Paul Ryan as a speaker, and he's just been fantastic. And so I went to dinner, and there were about a dozen of us. And we were out in a restaurant, and it was in a room that was separate from the restaurant. And I was excited and ready to eat and was ready to jump in. And Paul Ryan said, "Now, would anybody mind if we bless the food before we eat it?" I'm from Utah. I'm used to blessing the food. And so I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to bail the speaker out. Nobody's going to know what to do." So I started, raised my hand and say, "Oh, I'm happy to bless the food." Before I could get my hand up, somebody across the table from me said, "I've got this." They bowed their heads, and he said a Catholic prayer. Paul Ryan's Catholic, and this gentleman was Catholic as well. About 8 of the dozen joined in on the prayer and knew all the words to the prayer. And then they went on and ate. Now, not very significant, but I want you to know that the elected leaders in Washington, D.C., most all of them look to a God and believe that they're directed by God in their work back there. 4 of my colleagues are former ministers, and I don't go to a meeting that doesn't start with a prayer back there. And I just think that's really cool and something that you should know, that the people back in Washington that are in the swamp, there's a lot of good people who are very well-intentioned. With that, let me once again thank you, and let's shift just a little bit. How's our time? Do we have any time for Q&A, Darren? Are we good? Carly, would you join me? Yes. They can ask me questions anytime. And let me just quickly make one more offer to you as we're starting here. I know many of you don't know me extremely well. Some of you do, but I'd like to just suggest to even of those that you know me well, that I would be happy to continue this dialogue with you in one-on-one or in small groups, and extend an invitation to those of you who came here today and are going to walk away saying, "Wow, I wish I could really learn more about his positions and where he's at on things," that if you'll work with me on timing, that I will meet with all of you on a one-on-one basis or in small groups, and we'd just be happy to continue this discussion at a much deeper level than we've had today. Okay? So where would you like to begin? Steve?
So what would you say is the top 2 or 3 biggest threats to the United States?
We'll both answer that, and I'll let you start.
I think one of the biggest threats is that we do not internalize the power or the responsibility of citizenship. Citizens are sovereign. That's a lot of power, and it's a lot of responsibility. And I think as citizens, we've gotten lazy about a lot of things. But I think we've gotten lazy about our politics, too. And we tend to think, well, someone else will solve the problem. It's not for me. I can give a little money here. I think as citizens, we need to be leaders in our communities and problem solvers. And I don't think we always do that. If you look at the history of the world, remember I was a history major, I'm not predicting the demise of the United States when I say this, but I am saying that most great nations fall not because of external threat, but because of internal complacency. So I think that's one. I think the second is we live in relativistic world, a morally relativistic world. And I think sometimes that causes us to get muddy, to get confused about what leadership is, who leaders are, and who are just famous people. I think it causes us to get confused about who are our allies and who are our enemies. I think it causes us to get confused about, actually, this is the right thing to do, and this isn't the right thing to do. And I think that's a danger as well.
Thank you. I think I'm quite in line. I'm going to maybe word it slightly different. I would say apathy and an unwillingness to engage, and probably either it's an overconfidence or not caring that people are just taking care of us, and that's okay, and we can let them do that. The other thing, one of my observations as a new member of Congress is very disturbing to me, and that is constituents want and demand short-term, feel-good things. And they don't demand of us long-term solutions. Now let me try to give you, is that fair? Have you seen
Our
that?
attention span is very short.
Yeah. So you want me, when the president separates children at the border, to stand up and say, that's terrible, knock it off. And that's all you want from me, right? And nobody is holding me accountable for my behind the scenes or my work beyond that initial statement. We spend an unruly amount of time as a staff making statements because that's what you want. Some of you are quite concerned about the climate, and you know what I hear from those that are concerned about the climate? If you would just come out with a statement that you, and I think, well, don't you want me to do anything? No, we want you to come out with a statement. And so this unquenchable desire for short-term, oh, that felt good, and then letting go before things are actually done and solved.
Well, just to build on that, if I can, we all love technology. We all love technology. But the downside of technology is it has shortened our attention span dramatically, and problem solving takes a long-term view. But it also causes us to get really distracted by what's right in front of us. So we can spend, how many of us spend all day long reacting, responding to what's on the device, and at the end of the day, we haven't accomplished anything at all. Most of what comes over that device is absolutely irrelevant, although it may be incredibly interesting. And we get distracted by all that.
Yeah. Right here, yeah.
I'm curious on what are some of your things that you're doing to help the rural counties?
Yesterday I get my days all mixed up. Day before yesterday, we had an opioid roundtable down in Price, and we're trying to pull together answers and resources for that issue. Economic development concerns us greatly. We're hosting a economic development summit in October where we're bringing employers from Utah Valley down to the Price area. It's crazy. You guys are having a hard time finding employees, and I've got double-digit employment only 60 miles away, and I'm trying to connect those two economies together. We have a rural broadband permitting bill in to get more broadband out throughout the rural parts of the district. And the first bill that I passed, we call it my fish bill, the 392-6 bill, actually helps the water users in the San Juan and the Colorado rivers so that they can take water out of that river and at the same time work with endangered species in the fish. And I've been to Price now. I've been in Congress 18 months, been to Price 15 times, and just am committed to just keep going back. And of course, the Native American issue has got to be a big part of that as well. Corey says, I'm getting this, so we're going to do the last question here, and then we've got to. So, Carly won't know much about that. We've had a very controversial issue here in Provo called bus rapid transit, and we put in a new bus rapid transit system, It's similar to light rail, but it operates as a bus. And it is just starting, and I have not, Sue and I the other day saw a bus go by, and there are those who predict that it will end quality of life as we know it. And others who say it's an essential part of growing. And so please ride it so that I don't get calls that say nobody's riding it. You really want to support me, go ride BRT. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you stay here for a moment, please?
Thank you. Come on in. We're so grateful to both of you for doing this. This has been a wonderful opportunity to get to know each of you better, and we're really grateful for the contributions you're making through your sacrifice and through your family's sacrifice to society. And because we're such good friends, socks.
Wow,
have
my own
great
pair
socks.
of Curtis, but I don't have some RevRoad socks. Thank you.
Let's hear it for both of them.
Missing someone.